Hello, my name is Michelle Hunter and I am about to wrap up my PhD in education with the University of York. My research was an investigation of the affective experiences of lecturers and students enrolled on English Medium Instruction (EMI) undergraduate programmes at a University of Applied Sciences in southern Germany. My talk this afternoon, or this morning, I don't know what time this is going out, so my talk hones in on three themes that I identified in my data that relate to how the EMI context gave rise to affective responses in my respondents. The third theme I want to focus on today is on other affect regulation strategies that I noticed amongst my students. And I thought this was particularly interesting because it showed how students were intentionally behaving to regulate fellow students' affect as well as their lecturers' affect. Affect in ELT researcher Jane Arnold quoted Stevek in a 2011 article in support of how she sees this inside and between as being basically what affect is about. Just let you read that quote quickly. And what Arnold said about affect is the central driver behind my PhD research. So investigating the affective experiences of these EMI students and lecturers, the complex multi-layered nature of the setting unfolded to reveal how it feels to operate in a learning environment through a foreign language. And contrary to much EMI literature that I read, the English language seemed to have less to do with triggering affect than how the stakeholders perceive each other's behaviours and attitudes. So that's what I want to share in this talk, some of what I learned from the PhD about how these EMI stakeholders experienced and regulated affect. And this is something that I believe can contribute to knowledge within the field of emotion in language learning. Briefly, these are the points I shall cover. Define affect in the EMI context, talk about why I want to focus on affect, introduce you to the EMI stakeholders who participated in my research, and then get to the themes from the data. And I'll wrap up with a brief conclusion. So expanding on my previous reference to Arnold, she captured the essence of how I perceived of affect in this complex setting of a multinational and multilingual EMI classroom. She highlights that on the one hand, there are the individual or personality factors, self-concept, self-esteem, anxiety, etc. that you see there on the slide. This is the inside. And then on the other hand, she talks about the relational aspects which develop between the participants in the classroom, between students and students, or between teacher and students, or even between learners and the target language, the content, the culture. We know that positive affect can provide invaluable support for learning, just as negative affect can close down the mind and prevent learning from occurring altogether. So incorporating various sources, I crafted my own contextualized definition of affect, which you can see here. So to add to the debate, the ongoing debate as to how exactly affect is defined, this is my little contribution. So why focus on affect? Well, research has shown that teacher and learner psychologies are inextricably linked. Affect is an integral part of our psychological makeup, and we as educators know how implicitly that taking care of emotions in class is as important as focusing on cognitive processing. People can't effectively learn or teach if they're affectively disturbed, if their sense of self-efficacy, autonomy, belonging, and well-being are out of kilter. It's going to be very hard to get on with the business of learning and teaching. We know from studies into EFL teacher social and emotional intelligence, you've probably read Gonu and Mercer's 2017 paper, they presented clear evidence that many language teachers are particularly good at taking care of affect. but specific research into affect in language learning and use contexts has, until very recently, been sorely lacking. And this was the gap that I identified in my literature review back in 2018. In particular, we knew very little about affective strategies used by EMI students. And it was an article I read by Surich and Griffith, 2017, investigating learner strategies in the Turkish EMI context that set me off on this path. They uncovered that affective strategies were the least mentioned by the study participants. Okay, to my stakeholders, the EMI stakeholders, I interviewed 4 home professors and 2 international guest lecturers. 3 of them taught on the full EMI programme, which was a Bachelor of Science in International Business, and 3 of them taught on 2 different partial EMI programmes. They were business engineering programmes. 12 international business students spoke with me, 8 of whom were German home students and 4 were international students, each from a different country. And I spoke with 9 business engineering students, 3 home and 6 Malaysians who were part of an ongoing exchange programme with a Malaysian partner university. And as I mentioned a minute ago, the main observation that caught my attention was that the use of English language in lectures caused little to no negative affect amongst any of the participants with whom I spoke. But that is not to say that the others I didn't get to speak to didn't struggle with English language issues. What bothered the students I spoke to was how lectures were delivered. They were frustrated by a perceived lack of interaction and dialogue during the EMI classes. And this contrasted starkly with the lecturers' reported negative affect when it was due to students, and in particular students' unresponsiveness in class. So this leads to my claim that there can be a disconnect between EMI stakeholders, and this centres around perceptions and expectations of how EMI content is delivered rather than the language of delivery. The 3 themes I'm going to focus on next are intercultural dissonance between home and international stakeholders, which I'm actually going to then subdivide into 2 sub-themes. Pedagogical expectations, where there's a mismatch between students and lecturers. And then with the 3rd theme, other regulation affective strategies that I noticed amongst students. Okay, so the first theme, we'll firstly look at the intercultural differences between stakeholders, and I've got 4 extracts to share with you. And then the second part of the first theme focuses on intercultural teaching differences, particularly expressed by the lecturer and students on the partial, the business engineering EMI courses. Okay, so first of all, looking at the international students' view of home students on the full EMI programme. So it was quite common amongst many of the international students to complain about Germans not sticking to English. So one student expressed that if you are in the group of where most mixed nationalities, the majority is German, I would say it's really challenging because you will feel completely left out, because somehow during the discussion they will just immediately switch to German and you're just left there and just wondering, what are they saying? And the same student also went on later to say that even though they, the university, say the programme is in English, students prefer to speak German and not English. So this caused a degree of negative affect. Listening to home students on the full EMI programme, some said that they preferred not to work with international students because they perceived them as having a less rigorous or conscientious attitude to studying, and they only wanted to do group work with people like them who were familiar with the German system and the way of group working. One student mentioned or complained, maybe it's too strong, but she said, "It is the same problem why Germans don't want to have group work with exchange students. It's not the language, it's about what we expect, how work must be done. Although there were other German home students on the same programme who relished the opportunity to study with people from other cultures and were okay with a potential reduction in any efficiency. One student said, "It always feels so much more alive and interesting to talk to people and to group work with people who come from a different country, simply because they have a different approach and like in their thinking, and the way they have had lectures in their home countries is just different. So I really enjoyed that diversity." Another aspect that came out was that some of the German home students felt it was very unfair when their classmates switched or slipped back into German when there were international students around. So for example, one person said, "So if I notice that someone doesn't switch to English immediately, or when an English-speaking person is present, I'm always trying to say, okay, please, let's go back to English, yeah? So no one person feels excluded." All right, the second part of the first theme, the intercultural teaching differences. So this is now moving to the partial EMI programme context. One of the lecturers, the home lecturers, noted how frustrating was too strong a word, he decided, but he described the following. "You see them, the Malaysian students, watching you. So they're not dreaming, they're watching you, waiting for the correct answer to note down. So the intention, so they are attentive, many of them are at least attentive. So they have their pens ready. Now, tell me what to note down." From the other perspective, the Malaysian students were very aware of this intercultural teaching difference, but it was hard for them. This is something one student said that the others confirmed feeling similarly. "The pressure is so high. In our home country, they don't really like to ask deep questions or ask you to explain the concept in your own contexts. Yeah, but here they would like to hear how you think about it first before explaining it. And it doesn't stop at one person. They will choose randomly 2 or 3 people to share their own understanding." Okay, the second theme to cover, pedagogical expectation differences. So this leads on nicely from the previous theme. Home lecturers were struggling sometimes this is what I was saying about how the perception of the students towards how they're teaching, and this is a quote, interesting one. "Although they're always telling you that's how we want to have the classes, the feedback, at least I feel I'm getting, is that ideally you just stand in front of the class, you just drop content, and they just stare and look at you and don't have to do anything. So at least that's what in the short run they prefer, although we all know it's not the best thing in the long run." And she went on to express in the situation with one particular cohort her deep frustration. She said, "They are just not interactive at all. It's just you're there and you're kind of, please do something, whatever. Even leave the room, get a heart attack, whatever, but do something. They're just sitting there. They don't do anything." Then from the other perspective of the students, this example was repeated quite a number of times. "Most of the professors we have, because of the fact we only have most subjects a final exam at the end of the semester and no participation grade, professors don't need to engage with our students as much or work on interpersonal relations or activities like that." International students reiterated what their home peers were suggesting, and this one student said that she would like to have more discussions, more conversations, instead of just having, like the professor, talking the whole class. And another one was very strong in her views. "I don't really like the way professor teach here, because most of the time I spend all the time reading alone. So I don't know how to improve the teaching skill. Maybe more interaction, maybe more practical examples, or something like that. That would be really great. And make my time here really valuable? Now to the third theme, the student other regulation strategies. This one student expressed how they tried to participate in order to encourage and motivate classmates to contribute and join in. And she says there at the end, "I just guess the answer, even if I have no idea." This one we've had before, but I felt it was an example of other regulation strategy, where she was trying to get to avoid the international students feeling excluded, to remind her classmates to stick to English in group discussions. This one, I kind of like this one. This very tall young man, 6'6", actively sat at the back so as not to impinge on his classmates' view of the lecturer. So he didn't block them. And I've added this one even though it's from the pilot study, because this is what first of all made me aware of this other regulation strategy that some students were engaging in. And he explained how he actively withdrew himself from answering questions so that other people could practice more and participate more. He was actually a native speaker of English, and so he didn't need to practice his English, but felt that his native German speaking classmates would benefit from him not speaking all the time. So here how students attempted to regulate lecturer affect. This student expressed how she tried to participate when she liked the professor, to show when she could see that the professor was engaged and motivated and working hard to give the students this interactive experience they wanted. Another one, situational. So this student talked about how she consciously sat in the front to encourage the lecturer, to show she was engaged and that he wasn't there on his own at the front. Mirroring. So this student expressed how she mirrored the lecturer's gestures to show sympathy. I think she probably meant empathy. And again, back to the student in the pilot study, he was explaining to me how he would actively sit forward and look engaged and interested and respectful, even if he wasn't really listening to the lecturer, but didn't want them to know that he wasn't listening, but to encourage them again to keep lecturing in the EMI class. So just to wrap up here then, what I would say in conclusion, based on the three themes I've introduced or shared with you in this talk, is I see that equipping EMI stakeholders with a clearer awareness of the role affect plays in learning furthers our understanding of what goes on inside and between both students and teachers, and at home and international students and teachers. And that what we learn from the participants of my research about how they experience and regulate affect will contribute to the field of emotion and language learning, as well as in the field of EMI education. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm really looking forward to furthering the conversation with you when we meet up live online during the conference.